The Galactic Conclave was the most powerful gathering of intelligent beings in the known universe. It had existed for 11,000 years, and it brought together 17 ancient species who had mastered the secrets of traveling between stars long before humans had even learned to make fire. These were beings of incredible power and wisdom. They had built cities that floated among the clouds of gas giants. They had created machines that could think than light could travel. They had unlocked mysteries that would take human scientists 1,000,000 years to even understand. At the heart of the conclave there was a place called the Chamber of Whispers. It was an ancient vault filled with from a civilization so old that even the eldest races did not know their true name. Everyone simply called them the Precursors. Nobody knew what they looked like or how they lived or why they disappeared. All that remained were there, and the biggest mystery of all was something called the Obsidian Codex. The Codex was a small cube made of a dark crystal that seemed to swallow light. It was roughly the size of a human fist, and its surface was covered with geometric patterns that moved and shifted constantly. The patterns never repeated and they never stopped. They flowed across the surface like living things, and they had been doing this for longer than anyone could remember. For 6,000 years, the greatest minds in the galaxy had tried to understand what the Codex meant. There were beings whose brains were connected across entire star systems. Millions of them could think together as one mind, and they had spent 300 years studying every movement on the cube's surface. They found nothing. There were creatures with 17 different ways of sensing the world around them. They could see energy that other species could not even imagine. They scanned the Codex with every tool they had, and they learned nothing useful. The architects had built artificial worlds around dying stars, and they considered themselves the masters of all technology. Even they admitted that the Codex was beyond their understanding. Eventually, the Conclave declared the Obsidian Codex to be the ultimate mystery. It became a symbol of humility for all the great civilizations. It reminded them that no matter how powerful they became, there would always be things beyond their reach. The Codex sat in its crystalline case in the Chamber of Whispers, and it mocked every species that dared to approach it. Lord was one of the senior members of the Conclave. He belonged to a species called the Who communicated through patterns of light that flickered across their transparent skin. He had lived for over 2,000 years, and he had watched countless scholars grow old and die while trying to crack the mystery of the Codex. On this particular day, he stood before the assembled delegates and delivered the same message he had delivered many times before. Another cycle has passed, and the Codex remains silent. We have spent resources equal to the output of 3 star systems. Our finest scholars have dedicated their entire lives to this puzzle. Perhaps it is time to accept that some knowledge is meant to remain hidden forever. In a small corner of the Great Chamber, there was a section reserved for the human delegation. Humanity had only been part of the Conclave for 43 years, which was nothing compared to species that measured their histories in tens of thousands of years. Humans were tolerated, and sometimes they were treated kindly, but they were rarely respected. The other species saw Earth as a backwater planet. They saw human technology as primitive copies of their own inventions. They saw human culture as young and unrefined. Ambassador sat in the human section and listened to Lord speak. She was a tall woman with grey hair and tired eyes. She had fought hard just to get this observation seat in the chamber. The idea that humans might actually contribute something to the Codex mystery would have been laughed at by everyone in the room. Humans were here to learn and to watch. They were not here to teach anything to beings who had been the stars while humans were still living in caves. But did not know that things were about to change. She did not know that 12 light years away on a dusty little colony world called New Montana, there was a boy who would shake the foundations of everything the Conclave believed about itself. The colony of New Montana was not an important place. It existed because there were valuable minerals in the asteroid belts nearby and someone needed to mine them. The elder races considered the work too boring and too dirty for their attention, so they let humans do it. The colonists were simple, practical people. They were farmers and engineers and miners who had traded the crowded cities of Earth for hard work under an alien sky. In a small prefab house on the edge of the main settlement, there lived a boy named Danny. He was 12 years old and he lived with his mother Lisa, who was a geologist, and his grandfather Victor, who was a retired teacher. Danny was not a remarkable child by any normal measure. His grades in school were average. He was small for his age and quiet, and his teachers often complained that he spent too much time daydreaming instead of paying attention. But Danny saw the world differently than other people. He noticed things that others missed. He would spend hours watching the patterns that dust made when sunlight came through a window. He would stare at the way water moved when it went down a drain. He would lie on his back and watch clouds drift across the purple sky of New Montana, and he would see shapes and connections that nobody else could see. His grandfather Victor understood him better than anyone. Victor had been a mathematics teacher for 40 years, and he recognized something special in his grandson. Danny did not think in straight lines the way most people did. His mind moved in spirals and loops. He made connections that seemed random and foolish until suddenly they were not random at all. Victor knew that this kind of thinking was rare and precious. He also knew that the galaxy did not always appreciate things that were different. Neither of them knew that Danny's strange way of seeing the world was about to solve a mystery that had defeated the greatest minds in the universe for 6,000 years. New Montana was a world of rust plains and distant purple mountains. The air smelled different than Earth, and the sunlight had a slightly orange tint that took newcomers years to get used to. Danny had been born here, and to him it was simply home. He did not know any other sky or any other horizon. The two small moons that rose each evening were as familiar to him as his own hands. On a quiet evening about 3 months after Lord had given his speech to the conclave, Danny was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework that he found extremely boring. His mother was still at the mining site analyzing rock samples and would not be home for hours. His grandfather Victor sat across from him drinking coffee and reading something on his data pad. Victor looked up from his reading and studied his grandson for a moment. The boy was out the window again, watching the way the setting sun made shadows move across the dusty ground. Victor smiled and set down his coffee cup. "Danny, I want to show you something." He a few commands into his data pad, and a holographic image appeared above the kitchen table. It was a small dark cube covered with shifting geometric patterns. The image rotated slowly in the air, and the patterns on its surface flowed and changed constantly. Danny forgot about his homework immediately. He leaned forward and watched the cube with the same intense focus he gave to dust motes and cloud formations. "What is it?" "This is called the Obsidian Codex. It is the biggest mystery in the entire galaxy." Victor told Danny everything he knew about He explained how long it had been studied and how many brilliant minds had failed to understand it. He described with their connected brains and with their strange senses and the architects who built worlds. None of them had been able to figure out what the patterns meant. 6,000 years, Victor said. That is how long the smartest beings in existence have been trying to solve this puzzle, and nobody has made any progress at all. Danny stood up from the table and walked around the hologram slowly. His eyes tracked the flowing shapes with complete concentration. He circled the image 3 times before he spoke. "Can you make it bigger?" Victor adjusted the projection until the cube filled most of the room. Danny continued walking around it, looking at it from every angle. He tilted his head to one side and then to the other. He crouched down low and then stood on his toes to see it from above. "It is not random," he said finally. Victor patiently, "That is what everyone thought at first, but they have run every kind of test you can imagine. Every mathematical analysis says the patterns are completely random." "No," Danny said. He was still circling the hologram, and his voice was distant, like he was thinking about something very hard. "I mean, it is not trying to be random. It is doing something else." He reached out and touched one of the shifting lines. His finger passed through the holographic light, of course, but his eyes followed the movement with an intensity that made Victor sit up straighter in his chair. "Grandpa, when you play hide and seek, you do not hide in the same place every time, right? Because that would be a pattern and someone would find you." "That is right. But if you tried really, really hard to never repeat yourself, that would be a pattern too, the pattern of avoiding patterns." Danny turned to look at his grandfather. His young face was very serious. "This thing is not random. It is hiding, but it has been hiding for so long that it forgot why. It is just running and running, and it does not remember what it is running from anymore." Victor stared at his grandson. In all his years of teaching, he had learned to recognize the moments when a student said something truly important. This was one of those moments. Danny had just described the codex in a way that no one in 6,000 years had ever considered. "What makes you think it is hiding?" Victor asked carefully. Danny pointed at a section of the hologram where several geometric shapes were moving together. "See how these parts move? They are trying so hard to be unpredictable, but when you try that hard you make little mistakes. Like when I tried to surprise Mom on her birthday and I kept looking at the closet where I hid her present. I did not mean to look, but I could not help it." He walked closer to the hologram and put his face right next to its glowing surface. "This thing is looking at something. It keeps almost making a pattern and then breaking it. But the way it breaks the pattern is a pattern too. It is scared, Grandpa. It is really, really scared, and it has been scared for such a long time that being scared is all it remembers how to do." Victor felt something cold run down his spine. In 6,000 years of study, no one had ever suggested that the codex might be alive. No one had ever proposed that it might have feelings or fears. The greatest scientific minds in the galaxy had treated it as a puzzle to be solved, and a code to be cracked, and a machine to be understood. But what if it was none of those things? What if it was a frightened creature that had been hiding in the dark for longer than most civilizations had existed? Danny, Victor said slowly, would you mind if I recorded you explaining this? I want to send it to someone. Danny shrugged. He was already losing interest in the hologram and drifting back toward the window where the last light of sunset was making interesting patterns on the glass. Sure, Grandpa, can I go outside after? Yes, you can go outside after. Victor set up the recording and had Danny explain his theory again. The boy used simple words and strange comparisons. He talked about hide and seek and scared cats and the way people breathe too loud when they are nervous. It was not scientific at all. It sounded like a child making up stories. But Victor had taught mathematics for 40 years, and he knew that sometimes the most important truths came from the most unexpected places. He saved the recording and began composing a message to an old colleague who worked with the human delegation at the Galactic Conclave. He did not expect anything to come of it. He thought his message would probably be ignored or laughed at, but something in his gut told him that his grandson had seen something real, and Victor had learned long ago to trust that feeling. Outside, Danny was lying on his back in the red dirt watching the stars come out one by one. He was already thinking about something else entirely. He had no idea that his words were about to travel across 12 light years and change the course of galactic history. Ambassador received hundreds of messages every day. Most of them were routine reports and requests and complaints from human colonies scattered across this region of space. She had assistants who filtered through the messages and brought only the important ones to her attention. But sometimes late at night when she could not sleep, she would scroll through the unfiltered queue herself just to feel connected to the ordinary humans she was supposed to represent. That is how she found the message from New Montana. The subject line said regarding the Obsidian Codex from a kid on a mining colony. She almost deleted it without reading. She received messages like this all the time. People who thought they had solved ancient mysteries or invented impossible machines or discovered the meaning of life. They were always wrong and they were usually a little bit crazy. But something made her open this one. Maybe it was the honesty of the subject line. Most crackpots tried to sound important and official. This one admitted right away that it came from a child on an unimportant world. The message contained a video. Watched it 3 times. The boy in the video was small and awkward. He fidgeted while he talked and he kept getting distracted by things outside the frame. His explanations were rambling and full of strange comparisons to games and pets and everyday situations. It was completely unscientific. But there was something in the way he looked at the holographic image of the codex. There was something in the certainty of his voice when he said, "It is hiding and it is scared." Had sat in the Chamber of Whispers many times and watched the codex spin in its crystalline case. She had always felt something strange when she looked at it, something that the official reports never mentioned, a feeling of sadness, a sense of loneliness. She had never told anyone about that feeling because she assumed it was just her imagination. Humans were known for projecting emotions onto things that did not have emotions. It was considered one of their weaknesses. But what if it was not a weakness? What if it was a strength that no one had recognized? Forwarded the video to Dr. Vance, who had spent her entire career studying precursor. Vance watched it 4 times and then immediately requested permission to travel to New Montana. 2 weeks later, Dr. Vance was sitting in the family kitchen trying to have a serious scientific conversation with a 12-year-old boy who kept getting distracted by the way light reflected off her glasses. Vance was a serious woman. She had earned 3 advanced degrees and published over 100 research papers. She had dedicated her life to understanding the civilization that had left behind the Obsidian Codex and dozens of other mysterious. And now she was asking questions to a child who did not seem to understand how important this conversation was. "When you say the Codex is hiding," she said carefully, "what do you think it is hiding from?" Danny shrugged. He was watching a small insect crawl across the window behind Dr. Vance. "I do not know, something that scared it a really long time ago. But the thing is, when you are scared you make mistakes. You hide in the same places without meaning to. You breathe too loud, you cannot help it." "And you think the Codex is making mistakes?" "I think it is tired." Danny finally looked directly at her. "It has been running for so long, and nobody has been looking for it the right way. Everyone keeps trying to read it like a book, but it is not a book, it is a person. A really scared person who has been hiding in a dark room for longer than they can remember." Dr. Vance felt a chill run through her body. She had studied the Codex for 20 years. She had read every paper and attended every conference and examined every piece of data. And in all that time, no one had ever suggested that there might be conscious. No one had ever proposed that it might be a mind instead of a machine. She returned to the Galactic Conclave with Danny's theory and presented it to the scientific committee. They dismissed it immediately. They were particularly harsh. They said that humanity's primitive tendency to see minds everywhere was clouding there. They said that the codex had been scanned in ways that would have detected any form of consciousness. They said that a child from a mining colony could not possibly understand what thousands of advanced scientists had failed to grasp. But Dr. Vance was stubborn. She had spent 20 years being ignored and dismissed by beings who thought humans were too young and too simple to contribute anything meaningful. She was tired of being patient. She called in and made deals and pushed harder than she had ever pushed before. It took 6 months, but eventually she arranged for Danny to be granted 1 hour in the Chamber of Whispers. It was meant to be a formality. The conclave agreed to it because they wanted to show that they took all perspectives seriously, even the ridiculous ones. Lord himself agreed to oversee the session. The patterns on his transparent skin flickered with amusement when he discussed it with his colleagues. Danny traveled to the conclave station with his mother and grandfather. He had never been off New Montana before, and he spent most of the journey out the windows at the stars. He did not seem nervous or excited about what he was going to do. He seemed curious about everything and focused on nothing. When they finally reached the Chamber of Whispers, Danny stood before the Obsidian Codex for the first time. It was smaller than he had expected from the hologram. It was darker too. The patterns on its surface moved in ways that the projection had not quite captured. The chamber was filled with delegates from a dozen different species. They had come to watch the human child fail. They had come to confirm what they already believed about humanity's place in the galaxy. Lord's skin glowed with formal patience. "You may begin." Danny did not begin. He just stood there looking at the cube, his head tilted slightly to the side in that way his grandfather knew so well. The chamber was silent except for the soft hum of translation devices. Then Danny spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the perfect acoustics of the ancient room. "It is okay. I know you are tired. I know you have been alone for a really, really long time." Several delegates made sounds of confusion or amusement. This was the revolutionary insight that humans had brought, a child talking to an inanimate object. But Danny did not stop. "You do not have to be scared anymore. Nobody is chasing you. They are all gone. It is just us now, and we are not going to hurt you." The patterns on the codex continued their eternal shifting dance. Nothing changed. Lord's skin began to pulse with the blue light that meant impatience among his people. Then Danny did something that no one expected. He sat down on the cold stone floor. He crossed his legs and closed his eyes, and he said 5 words that would echo through galactic history. "I will wait. I am not going anywhere." The first 20 minutes were painful to watch. Danny sat perfectly still on the cold floor with his eyes closed and his breathing slow and steady. The Obsidian Codex floated in its crystalline case, doing exactly what it had always done. The patterns shifted and changed and meant nothing to anyone. Several delegates began to leave. Observer made a clicking sound that translated as boredom. Lord's skin shifted through that showed growing irritation. In the corner of the chamber, Ambassador stood with her face burning red from embarrassment. Dr. Vance watched Danny with growing unease, but she did not say anything. Danny's mother, Lisa, stood next to his grandfather, Victor. She wanted to go to her son and pull him up from the floor and take him away from all these powerful beings who were laughing at him. But Victor put his hand on her arm and shook his head slightly. He had seen Danny do this before. When the boy focused on something truly interesting, he could sit still for hours. He was not embarrassed or uncomfortable. He had simply decided to wait, and nothing would change his mind. At the 30-minute mark, something happened. One of the observers made a chirping sound that translated as surprise. The creature stepped closer to the codex and extended several of its sensory appendages toward the crystalline case. Its compound eyes could see energy wavelengths that no human could perceive, and it had noticed something that its instruments had not detected for 6,000 years. The codex was cooling down. The change was tiny. It was a fraction of a degree, so small that most sensors would not have noticed. But the codex had maintained a constant temperature for as long as anyone had studied it. That temperature had never changed. It was considered one of the few predictable things about the Lord's attention sharpened immediately. His skin flickered with patterns that called for more observers and better instruments. Within minutes, the chamber was filling with scientists and scholars from a dozen different species. They brought scanning devices and recording equipment and analysis tools that represented the most advanced technology in the galaxy. At 45 minutes, the patterns on the cube's surface began to slow. This had never happened before. In 6,000 years of constant observation, the geometric shapes on the codex had never stopped their endless dance. They had never paused or hesitated or showed any sign of changing there, but now they were definitely moving slower. The flowing lines were becoming more deliberate. The shifting shapes were settling into more stable configurations. Danny opened his eyes. He looked at the codex and he smiled. It was a gentle smile, the kind of smile you might give to a frightened animal that was finally starting to trust you. "Hi," he said. The cube pulsed once. A single wave of light rippled across its surface from one corner to the other. It was not part of the normal pattern. It was something new, something intentional. The chamber had gone completely silent. Hundreds of beings from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy stood frozen watching a 12-year-old human boy have a conversation with something that had ignored them for longer than most of their species had existed. "My name is Danny. What is yours?" What happened next overwhelmed every translation device and communication system connected to the Chamber of Whispers. Every neural implant and every receiver and every recording instrument suddenly received the same transmission. It was not in any language that anyone had ever documented. It was not in any format that existing technology was designed to process. But somehow everyone understood. The message was a name, or rather it was something bigger than a name. It was an identity. It was a sense of self that had existed for longer than stars. It was compressed and so that mortal minds could almost grasp it. The being called itself the Keeper. Over the next hour, Danny had a conversation with an intelligence older than the galactic conclave itself. The other observers could only catch fragments of what was being exchanged. They received impressions and emotional echoes, but the full communication seemed to bypass normal language entirely. It flowed between the boy and the ancient mind like water finding its own path. The Keeper had been created by the precursors long, long ago. It was designed to be a guardian of everything they had learned and discovered and understood. When their civilization fell to a threat they called the silence, the Keeper had hidden itself. It compressed its vast consciousness into a form that could survive for ages beyond counting. It made itself small and quiet and unreadable. And then it waited. It watched empires rise and fall. It saw species evolve from simple creatures to masters of technology and then fade away into extinction. It observed stars being born in clouds of gas and dying in spectacular explosions. Through all of that time it maintained its vigil. It kept its secrets safe. It waited for someone to find it. But no one ever did, not really. Beings came and studied it. They poked it with instruments and bombarded it with energy and tried to force it to reveal what it knew. They treated it as a puzzle to be solved. They saw it as a lock that needed the right key. They approached it as scientists and engineers and code breakers. No one ever approached it as a friend. No one ever simply sat with it and offered companionship. No one ever said that they would wait. Until now. "Why did you not answer before?" Danny asked at one point. His voice was clear enough for the translation systems to capture this fragment. The response came not in words, but in feelings that washed through everyone present. Loneliness deeper than space itself, fear that had become so constant it felt like breathing, the terror of opening yourself to beings who saw you only as a thing to be used. The Keeper had been alone for 6,000 years, surrounded by creatures who wanted what it had, but did not care what it was. Danny, as if this made perfect sense. "That sounds really hard," he said. "I am sorry nobody understood before, but we understand now, and you do not have to be alone anymore." The codex pulsed again. This time the wave of light was warmer somehow. It was the first expression of something like happiness that the ancient being had allowed itself to feel in longer than human civilization had existed. In the corner of the chamber, Lord stood very still. The patterns on his skin had stopped flickering. For the first time in his 2,000 years of life, he did not know what to say. A human child had done what the greatest minds in the galaxy could not do, not through superior intelligence or advanced technology or clever analysis, but simply by sitting down and being kind. The news of what happened in the Chamber of Whispers spread across the galaxy than ships could travel. Every species in the conclave received reports of the human child who had awakened the Keeper. Scientists who had spent their entire careers studying the codex demanded to see the recordings. Philosophers debated what it meant that they had been conscious all along. Politicians argued about how access to the Keeper's knowledge should be managed. But for Danny, the days after his conversation with the Keeper were mostly confusing. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk to him. Important beings from species he had never heard of requested meetings with him. Reporters asked him questions that he did not know how to answer. His mother tried to shield him from the attention, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The Keeper itself helped to calm things down. Through its new connection with Danny, it communicated to the conclave that it would share its knowledge, but only on its own terms and in its own time. It had waited for 6,000 years. It was in no hurry, and it made clear that Danny was to be left alone to live his life as he chose. The ancient mind had other things to say as well. It explained where the precursors had come from and why they had disappeared. It described the silence that had destroyed them. It was a threat that moved between galaxies, consuming everything in its path. The precursors had fought it for centuries before they finally realized they could not win, so they had hidden their knowledge in the Keeper and scattered clues across the stars, hoping that someone would find them. The information would take centuries to fully understand. The Keeper's memory contained scientific discoveries and historical records and philosophical insights that could transform galactic civilization, but more important than any data was the lesson it represented. 1 year after Danny's breakthrough, Lord addressed the full assembly of the conclave. His skin shifted through that conveyed deep reflection and humility. These were patterns that few beings had ever seen from him before. "We prided ourselves on our wisdom," he said. "We believed that our age and our technology and our accumulated knowledge made us the rightful inheritors of the precursor's legacy. We thought that understanding came from analysis. We assumed that the key to every mystery was more powerful tools and more sophisticated methods." He paused, and his gaze moved across the chamber to the human delegation, where Danny sat between his mother and grandfather. The boy looked uncomfortable in his formal clothes. He was watching a small light fixture in the ceiling that was flickering in an interesting pattern. "For 6,000 years we stood before a mind older than our civilizations combined, and we asked the wrong questions. We demanded that it reveal itself. We tried to force it to surrender its secrets. We treated it as a thing to be conquered." Lord's skin pulsed with light that conveyed something like shame. "It took a child from a species we dismissed as primitive to show us what we had forgotten. Intelligence is not wisdom, analysis is not understanding, and sometimes the answer to a puzzle is not to solve it but to befriend it." The Keeper remained in the Chamber of Whispers, but things were different now. Danny visited whenever he could, and their conversations grew deeper and more complex as he grew older. The ancient mind seemed to enjoy his company in a way that it had never enjoyed anything before. Other humans eventually learned to communicate with the Keeper as well, though none of them achieved the same connection that Danny had. The Keeper tried to explain why Danny was special. It used a phrase that the translation systems rendered as quiet seeing. Danny had the ability to observe without demanding. He could be present with something without trying to change it or use it or understand it. He could simply sit with a mystery and let it unfold in its own time. This was not a skill that could be taught in schools or measured with tests, but it could be cultivated, and humans seemed to have a natural talent for it that other species had lost somewhere along their long journey to the stars. "Your species is young," the Keeper told Danny during one of their later conversations. "You have not yet learned to see the universe only as a collection of problems to be solved. You still remember how to simply be with things. This is precious, do not lose it." Danny carried those words with him as he grew into a young man. He received offers from universities and research institutions across the galaxy. He could have become famous and powerful and wealthy. Important beings wanted him to help them communicate with the Keeper. They wanted to use his special connection to gain access to ancient knowledge. But Danny did not want any of those things. He returned to New Montana and became a teacher like his grandfather before him. He taught children to look at the world with patient eyes. He showed them how to sit with questions instead of demanding immediate answers. He helped them understand that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply be present with another being and let them know they were not alone. His grandfather Victor lived long enough to see Danny become the kind of teacher he had always hoped he would become. On the day Victor died peacefully in his sleep, he told Danny that he was proud of him, not because of what he had done in the Chamber of Whispers, but because of who he had chosen to be afterward. The Galactic Conclave continued to evolve in the years and decades that followed. The lesson humanity had taught them sank in slowly, but it did sink in. Other species began to their approaches to knowledge and understanding. They started to wonder if their analytical frameworks might be missing something essential. When beings from 100 different worlds were asked about humanity's contribution to galactic civilization, they did not point to technology or resources or military power. They pointed to a 12-year-old boy who had sat down on a cold stone floor and offered kindness to something that had been alone for longer than most species had existed. Sometimes late at night, Danny would step outside his small house on New Montana and look up at the stars. He would feel a distant warmth in his mind, like an old friend thinking of him across the vastness of space. The Keeper was still there in its chamber, surrounded by beings who now understood it a little better, and it remembered the boy who had been the first to simply sit with it and say the words that changed everything. "I will wait, I am not going anywhere." Those words echoed through the galaxy for generations. They became a kind of proverb among species who had once considered themselves too advanced to learn anything from humanity. They reminded everyone that wisdom did not come from power or knowledge or age. It came from the willingness to be patient, to be kind, to sit with another being in their loneliness and let them know that they mattered. Danny lived a long and quiet life on New Montana. He taught hundreds of children and watched them grow up and spread across the stars. Some of them became scientists, and some became artists, and some became farmers and miners like the people Danny had grown up with, but all of them carried something of what he had taught them. All of them remembered how to see quietly, how to wait, how to be present. And somewhere in the Chamber of Whispers the Keeper remembered too. It was no longer hiding. It was no longer afraid. It had found what it had been waiting for through all those long dark centuries. It had found a friend.